Imagine standing on the edge of a world in flux. The ground beneath your feet is not fixed, not permanent, but part of a restless puzzle that never stops moving. What we know today as continents, separate, scattered pieces of land, were once drawn together, fused into a single, colossal world, Pangea. But how does a planet assemble a landmass so immense? And what was life like when Earth was almost one unbroken land, surrounded by a single, endless ocean? To answer that, we need to journey back more than 300 million years to an Earth unrecognizable to our eyes. The story begins with drifting land masses, fragments of earlier supercontinents broken apart by the ceaseless forces within Earth's mantle. These fragments, ancient pieces of what we now call Africa, South America, North America, Europe, Asia, and beyond, did not wander aimlessly. They were carried slowly across the globe, riding on tectonic plates that shift only a few centimeters per year. But give those plates tens of millions of years, and their movement becomes epic. Continents that once lay oceans apart began to creep closer, like magnets drawn by unseen hands. Bit by bit, collision by collision, they assembled into a single world-spanning giant. Each impact reshaped the surface of the Earth. When two plates collided, the crust had nowhere to go but upward, folding and thrusting into vast mountain ranges. Imagine ranges that could rival the Himalayas rising out of barren seas, their peaks scraping the sky, their roots sinking deep into the planet's crust. These scars of collision are still with us. The Appalachians in North America, the Ural Mountains in Russia, the ranges of North Africa and Europe, all whisper the same story. They are the remnants of Pangea's birth, the geological stitches that once tied continents together. But mountains were only one part of this transformation. As the continents fused, the climate of Earth began to change. Vast interiors of land grew isolated from the cooling influence of the seas. Rain clouds that formed along the coasts rarely reached these inner regions. Slowly, deserts spread outward, swallowing what was once fertile ground. Imagine a dry heartland, stretching for thousands of kilometers, a barren sea of red sands and rock under a scorching sun. At the same time, other regions flourished. River systems carved deep valleys across the new supercontinent. Lush wetlands and sprawling forests thrived along its coasts, fed by the surrounding ocean. The climate of Pangea was one of contrasts. Parched deserts at its core, green abundance along its edges. It was a world of extremes. And yet, for all its harshness, Pangea was alive. Early reptiles prowled the forests. Amphibians swam through the river deltas, and vast conifer forests stretched skyward, creating canopies that trapped heat and moisture. Insects, some far larger than their modern cousins, buzzed through the air. It was a time of experimentation in life, when survival meant adapting to a landscape reshaped by the sheer immensity of this new supercontinent. But think about it. How strange must it have been for life to inhabit such a place? Today, oceans create natural boundaries, isolating species on different continents. But in Pangea, there were no boundaries. Life could spread almost without limits. Species that once evolved in isolation were suddenly thrown together, predators and prey meeting across landscapes that stretched endlessly under a single sky. This global mixing would forever change the course of evolution, and surrounding it all was Panthalassa, the great world ocean. A single immense body of water encircled the landmass, its waves crashing against Pangea's shores. Its currents shaped the climate, carrying heat across the globe in powerful circulations. To stand on the beaches of Pangea would have been to look out on an ocean with no end. No other landmass broke the horizon. It was an Earth both unified and lonely. Yet even as Pangea stood whole, its creation carried the seeds of its own destruction. Deep within Earth's mantle, the same forces that had pushed the continents together continued to churn. Pressure built, fractures formed, and though invisible at first, the cracks would one day split Pangea apart again. But for now, in this chapter of Earth's history, the planet stood in its rarest state. A single, colossal continent, mountains thrust high, deserts vast and dry, forests green and thick with life. A world like no other, before or since. So let us ask, what would it have felt like to walk across Pangea? To journey from one horizon to the next without ever touching the sea? Would you feel the vastness of its deserts pressing down with silence? Would you marvel at the rivers carving through fertile plains? Would you hear the wind carrying the same whispers across a land that seemed endless? Pangea was more than just a continent. It was a moment in Earth's long, restless story, proof that our planet is never still, that land and life alike are always in motion. And though Pangea is gone, broken apart into the scattered continents we know today, its legacy is all around us, in mountains, in fossils, in the very shape of the world. This was the birth of a supercontinent, and it would change the destiny of life forever. Picture a world where there were no continents as we know them today, no borders, no oceans, dividing one land from another. Instead, nearly all of Earth's land was fused together into one colossal supercontinent, Pangea. In this immense land of unity, life adapted to a planet both harsh and fertile, vast and unbroken. Forests, swamps, deserts, and plains stretched across unimaginable distances. But what kind of creatures called this strange world home? The coasts of Pangea were alive with abundance. Thick forests rose from the wetlands, towering conifers and seed ferns, forming canopies that trapped moisture in the air. Beneath their shade, the ground was a carpet of ferns, mosses, and early shrubs. Insects buzzed everywhere, giants by modern standards. Dragonflies with wingspans as wide as hawks soared through the humid air, while millipedes, longer than a human arm, crawled through the undergrowth. But these forests were more than just plants and insects. Amphibians, some the size of crocodiles, lurked in swamps and rivers, their eyes just above the waterline as they waited for prey. And wandering through the shaded clearings were synapsids, the strange mammal-like reptiles that would one day give rise to mammals. They came in many shapes. Some were small, quick insect hunters, darting through the ferns. Others were bulkier, plant-eating forms, with barrel-like bodies built to graze. And among them prowled formidable predators, with sharp teeth and powerful jaws, the ancestors of creatures that would later evolve into something astonishing. Travel inland, though, and the landscape changes dramatically. Here, far from the moderating influence of the ocean, lies Pangea's great interior deserts. They stretched for thousands of kilometers, barren and red, broken only by occasional rivers and scattered vegetation. It was a world of survival, where only the hardiest plants and animals could endure. The plants here were scrubby, adapted to preserve every drop of moisture. Small reptiles scuttled across the hot sands, hiding beneath rocks and burrows to escape the burning sun. Predators patrolled these open spaces, built for speed and endurance, capable of surviving long stretches without food or water. It was a stark contrast to the green, humid belts along the coasts. Pangea was not a uniform paradise. It was a continent of extremes. And yet, its unity meant something profound. Unlike our modern Earth, where oceans create barriers between ecosystems, Pangea was an open stage. Life could spread almost without limit. A species that evolved in what we now call Africa could, over generations, wander across the plains into regions that would one day be North America or Asia. There were no seas to stop them, no isolated islands where life was trapped in seclusion. This mixing created a strange tapestry of ecosystems. Creatures from distant regions encountered one another, sharing the same forests, competing for the same resources, and driving evolution into new directions. Fossils today reveal this extraordinary interconnectedness. Identical species preserved on continents that are now separated by oceans, thousands of kilometers wide. And in this world without borders, the synapsids began to rise. These were the precursors of mammals, creatures that breathed more efficiently than reptiles, that generated more energy, that hinted at warm-bloodedness. They were small at first, overshadowed by larger reptilian predators, but their adaptability was their strength. They could scurry, hide, and exploit niches others ignored. In the chaotic ecosystems of Pangea, being small and versatile was a winning strategy. Reptiles, meanwhile, were diversifying in their own way. Some grew into formidable hunters, prowling swamps and forests with sharp teeth and stealth. Others adapted to herbivory, grazing on the hardy plants that spread across the land. In this evolutionary arms race, every adaptation mattered. Speed, endurance, armor, size. Life on Pangea was a constant experiment in survival. The skies, too, were alive. Giant insects thrived in oxygen-rich air. Some were predators themselves, swooping down on smaller insects with precision. Imagine walking through a dense forest, only to hear the deep, rattling buzz of wings, as large as a bird's passing overhead. And beneath the surface of rivers and wetlands, amphibians, some massive armored forms, waited for unsuspecting prey. These ecosystems were layered, complex, and unlike anything we see today. But for all its vibrancy, life on Pangea faced constant challenges. The climate shifted between extremes. Summers in the interior could be scorching, winters bitterly cold. Forests burned, deserts expanded, and rainfall came in erratic cycles. Entire ecosystems had to adapt or vanish. Yet out of this volatility, resilience was born. The creatures of Pangea, from insects to synapsids, learned to endure extremes. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for the great evolutionary dramas yet to come. The rise of dinosaurs, the persistence of mammals, and eventually, so imagine it, walking across Pangea during this age of unity. You'd pass through endless forests humming with life, where dragonflies with wings like daggers buzzed overhead. You'd cross deserts so vast that the horizon shimmered with heat, broken only by the tracks of reptiles moving in search of scarce food. You'd hear the croaks of giant amphibians in the swamps, the rustle of synapsids in the undergrowth, the distant roar of predators echoing across plains without end. It was a world both alien and familiar, a world unified by land, but divided by extremes of climate and survival. Pangea was not just a supercontinent of rock and soil. It was a crucible of life, and everything that walked, crawled, flew, or swam upon it carried forward the legacy of that strange, boundless age. Imagine standing on the shores of Pangea. Behind you, an endless expanse of land stretches so far you could walk for months and never touch another coastline. But in front of you lies something even more overwhelming. Panthalassa, the single vast ocean that wrapped itself around the supercontinent like a cosmic embrace. This was no ordinary sea. It was not broken by familiar continents, no chains of islands scattered to soften its waves. Panthalassa was an ocean on a scale beyond our imagination, a true water world, circling the entire globe. To live on the edge of Pangea was to face the power of Panthalassa every single day. Its waves could be monstrous, its storms unrelenting. With no continents to break the flow, currents traveled unopposed for tens of thousands of kilometers, gathering strength and speed. Hurricanes could swell to unimaginable proportions, feeding on warm waters and unchecked winds. Have you ever stood by the ocean and felt small? Now, picture an ocean with no end in sight, where the horizon hides not another continent, but only more rolling water, stretching into infinity. That was Panthalassa. But this ocean was not just a backdrop. It was the engine that drove the planet's climate. Today, our weather is shaped by a patchwork of seas and continents, each influencing wind and rainfall. But during the age of Pangea, there was only one vast continent and one great ocean. The balance was different and extreme. Currents circled the globe like colossal conveyor belts, redistributing heat in ways we struggle to fully reconstruct. The coastal regions of Pangea received moisture from the sea, feeding forests and swamps. Yet the interior of the supercontinent, so far removed from Panthalassa's influence, was parched, scorched by desert heat. One world, yes, but divided by its own geography, abundance on the edges, desolation in the middle. Panthalassa also carried secrets in its depths. Its waters teemed with life, early fish, marine reptiles, ammonites spiraling through the currents. Coral reefs grew in pockets, though not as widespread as today. In some places, oxygen levels dropped dangerously low, creating vast dead zones. Imagine entire regions of the ocean where nothing could survive. Silent waters stretching for thousands of kilometers. And yet, other areas thrived, bursting with life that would one day fossilize into strange reminders of this forgotten sea. But perhaps the most mysterious aspect of Panthalassa was its storms. Without continents to block their path, winds could howl around the globe, growing wilder with every turn. Rainfall patterns were warped, unpredictable. Coastal regions were battered by deluges, while inland deserts remained bone dry. The ocean was both giver and taker, blessing some lands with fertility while condemning others to barren lifelessness. What must it have felt like to stand on the cliffs of Pangea, watching a storm roll across an unbroken ocean? No shelter, no island to blunt its power. Just a wall of wind and water, hammering the land with the fury of a world-sized sea. And here lies the paradox of unity. With one landmass and one ocean, Earth was at once simpler and far more extreme. There were no middle grounds, no gentle balances. The world swung between abundance and scarcity, flood and drought, calm and devastation. Panthalassa controlled everything, the winds that sculpted the deserts, the rains that fed the forests, the currents that spread warmth or stole it away. Without this ocean, Pangea itself could not exist as it did, but time changes all. The very same forces that created Pangea and its endless ocean would also tear them apart. Plate tectonics, that slow but relentless engine beneath our feet, would eventually split the land and carve new seas into Panthalassa. What once was whole would fragment, and the great superocean would vanish, leaving behind only echoes in the Pacific and scattered clues in rocks and fossils. Today, when you gaze upon the Pacific Ocean, you're staring at the last surviving fragment of Panthalassa. It is vast, yes, but even it is only a shadow of what once was. So, the question lingers. What would it have felt like to live in a world surrounded by a single, endless ocean? To watch the tides of Panthalassa shape every breath of wind, every drop of rain, every storm that lashed against the shores of Pangea? Perhaps in some way, we still feel its legacy today, in the deserts that remain where once the heart of Pangea burned dry, in the fossilized corals that once thrived on its coasts, and in the endless, restless waters of the Pacific that still whisper of a time when the world was united by one vast sea. Panthalassa was not just an ocean. It was a force of nature, a living system, and perhaps the greatest stage upon which Earth's ancient drama ever played out. Picture the supercontinent of Pangea not from its edges, where the seas nourished forests and swamps, but from its center, a place so far from the ocean that rain clouds rarely arrived. Here lay the harsh heart of Pangea, a land of extremes where survival itself was the greatest challenge. The sheer size of Pangea was both its triumph and its curse. Along its coasts, life flourished. Rivers carved deltas, forests grew thick, and swamps pulsed with strange creatures. But the deeper you traveled into its interior, the more unforgiving the world became. Without the moderating touch of the sea, temperatures swung violently. Summers blazed with blistering heat, while winters froze the land in silence. The skies often stayed cloudless, the air dry, the soil cracked. This was not just desert. It was desert on a continental scale stretching across thousands of kilometers. Imagine walking across these vast plains. Day after day, the sun scorched the horizon. The wind carried fine red dust, staining the sky. Rivers were rare, and when they appeared, they often vanished into the sand, swallowed by the thirsty earth before reaching the sea. Geologists today can still trace these ancient arid zones. They appear as red beds, iron-rich rocks formed under hot, oxygen-heavy conditions. These rocks are the fossilized footprints of Pangea's deserts, still scattered across continents that are now worlds apart. Wherever we find them, they whisper the same truth. The center of Pangea was a realm of fire and dust. But what kind of life could possibly endure such extremes? In the shade of rocky outcrops, small plants clung to survival. Many evolved thick leaves or deep roots to store water. Primitive conifers dotted the landscape, hardy enough to withstand drought. Ferns and seed plants huddled along riverbanks, wherever moisture could still be found. For animals, the challenge was even greater. Insects, some of them enormous by today's standards, scuttled across the sands, armored against the sun. Reptiles, with their scaly skin, had an advantage. They could conserve water better than their amphibian ancestors. Some of the earliest synapsids, distant relatives of mammals, prowled the desert edges, their bodies adapted to heat and scarcity. Yet many creatures never ventured far inland. The desert core was simply too harsh. Fossil evidence shows that biodiversity dropped dramatically the farther one moved away from the coasts. Life concentrated itself at the margins, while the interior remained a vast, intimidating void. And yet, this emptiness was not meaningless. The deserts of Pangea shaped evolution itself. In such unforgiving environments, only the strongest, most adaptable species survived. Traits like water conservation, burrowing behaviors, and heat tolerance developed here, etched into the genetic memory of life. The heart of Pangea was a crucible, a place where nature tested its creations. Many species failed. A few endured. And those survivors carried their resilience into the ages that followed. But the contrasts of Pangea were as dramatic as the land itself. Travel outward from the desert core, and the world slowly softened. Rain carried from Panthalassa fell more frequently near the coasts, feeding rivers that wound through forests and swamps. Coal deposits from these humid regions still lie buried today, proof of lush vegetation that once blanketed Pangea's margins. So, on one world, two realities coexisted, vibrant, What would it have felt like to live in the heart of Pangea, to stand in a land where horizons stretched endlessly, where the silence of the desert was broken only by the howl of the wind? No seas, no forests, no shelter, only the beating sun and the endless dust. For ancient creatures, each day was a battle against the very planet they called home. And yet, this was the stage on which life continued its slow, relentless march. The harsh heart of Pangea reminds us of something profound. Even in the most desolate places, life finds a way. It adapts. It endures. It transforms struggle into strength. Perhaps this is why deserts, then and now, carry a strange beauty. They are not empty. They are testing grounds, proving grounds, landscapes where only the resilient can thrive. Pangea's deserts may be long gone, eroded and broken apart as the supercontinent itself split into fragments. But their legacy remains, in the rocks beneath our feet, in the fossils of the creatures that survived them, and in the very strategies of life that endure to this day. So, the next time you look at a modern desert, whether it's the Sahara, the Gobi, or the American Southwest, imagine it multiplied 100-fold. Imagine it stretching across the heart of a supercontinent, unbroken for thousands of kilometers. That was the harsh heart of Pangea, Earth's most unforgiving wilderness, a land that shaped the course of life itself. Beneath the quiet surface of Pangea, forces were stirring. Forces older than mountains, deeper than oceans, and more relentless than time itself. The world above may have seemed solid, but under its crust, Earth was never still. And in the heart of this ancient supercontinent, fire waited to be unleashed. For millions of years, Pangea had stood as a single, immense landmass. Its deserts stretched for thousands of kilometers. Its coasts teemed with forests, swamps, and rivers. To the creatures roaming its surface, this continent may have seemed eternal, unshakable. But Earth is a restless planet, and even the greatest of continents cannot resist the slow, patient pull of tectonic forces. Deep below, in the mantle, heat built up like pressure inside a sealed furnace. Convection currents, vast, slow rivers of molten rock, shifted and surged, pushing against the crust above. The weight of Pangea, spread across such an enormous span, only intensified the strain. And eventually, the crust began to fracture. Imagine standing on Pangea at this moment in history. At first, the changes were subtle. A crack in the ground where none had been before. Valleys deepening slowly, splitting the land in jagged lines. Over time, these cracks widened into rifts, gashes in the Earth's skin where the land itself was being pulled apart. From these wounds, fire emerged. Volcanoes rose where the crust tore open, spewing rivers of molten lava. Ash clouds darkened the skies, blotting out the sun. The land trembled as earthquakes shook the ground, reminding every creature that beneath their feet was a world of unimaginable power. These eruptions were not isolated spectacles. They reshaped entire regions of Pangea. Lava flows buried forests, sealed rivers, and forged new landscapes of black rock. Gases released from the eruptions altered the climate, sometimes warming the planet, sometimes choking the skies in a haze of ash. Life adapted or perished in the shadow of this fire. For the animals of Pangea, the world was changing in ways they could neither predict nor escape. Imagine herds of reptiles grazing near river valleys, suddenly forced to flee as glowing streams of molten rock advanced across the land. Imagine early synapsids burrowing into the earth for shelter as the ground trembled with quakes. Survival was no longer just about predators or prey. It was about enduring the fury of the earth itself. To scientists today, the volcanic scars of Pangea tell a powerful story. In regions that would one day become Africa, North America, and Europe, massive igneous formations still remain. frozen reminders of those ancient eruptions. The very stones beneath modern cities once flowed as molten rivers across the fractured heart of a supercontinent. But these eruptions were more than destruction. They were also creation. Where rifts opened, oceans would one day follow. Where lava hardened, new land took shape. The slow tearing of Pangea was not a sudden catastrophe, but the beginning of a transformation, a long, fiery goodbye to a world that had seemed unbreakable. So, was this the end of Pangea, or the beginning of something else? The truth is, both. The rift valleys carved into its surface were the earliest whispers of the map we know today. Between North America and Africa, between Gondwana and Laurasia, the cracks widened, inch by inch, century by century. Water would eventually pour in, filling the valleys, giving birth to new seas. The Atlantic Ocean, which now separates continents, began here, born in fire, ash, and the relentless drift of tectonic plates. The creatures alive during this time could not have known what was unfolding beneath them. To them, the world was chaotic, unstable, terrifying. To us, looking back, it is a reminder that even the grandest structures of Earth are temporary. Mountains rise, oceans close, continents fuse, and then, inevitably, they break apart again. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of Pangea, not its existence, but its impermanence. For while it seemed like a final unification of land, it was, in truth, just a fleeting chapter in Earth's long, fiery story. Stand today in the rift valleys of East Africa, where continents are still pulling apart, and you are standing in an echo of Pangea's fate. The same forces are at work, slowly but surely, tearing the land. Someday, millions of years from now, new oceans will exist where grasslands now stretch. The Earth does not forget. It continues its restless cycle, shaping and reshaping itself in fire and stone. The story of Pangea's fiery fractures is not just a tale of geology. It is a reminder of the fragility of permanence. Even what seems eternal is subject to change. Even the mightiest of worlds is vulnerable to the quiet, relentless power beneath our feet. The cracks that split Pangea were not endings. They were beginnings. And from them, the Earth we know today was born. Imagine a planet gasping for breath, forests collapsing into ash, oceans turning from cradles of life into dead, silent wastelands, skies thick with poison. This was Earth at its darkest hour. The moment scientists call the Great Dying. It happened around 252 million years ago, near the close of the Permian period, long before the first dinosaurs ever walked the land. And yet, the catastrophe was so complete, so merciless, that even today it remains the most devastating extinction in our planet's history. More than 90% of marine species vanished. Over 70% of life on land was erased. It wasn't just a chapter ending. It was as if the entire book of life had been set aflame. But what could cause such total destruction? What chain of events could bring Earth itself to the edge of silence? The story begins beneath the surface, where fire and pressure were gathering. In a region that is now Siberia, colossal volcanic eruptions tore through the crust. For nearly 1 million years, lava flooded the land, covering millions of square kilometers in molten rock. These eruptions were not isolated blasts. They were relentless, a firestorm from the deep earth that refused to end. With them came gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur compounds that poured into the atmosphere. The planet's climate spiraled out of balance. Global temperatures soared, oceans warmed, and the very chemistry of Earth began to shift against life itself. The seas, once vibrant with coral reefs, armored fish, and swarms of trilobites, turned deadly. Rising carbon dioxide levels made the oceans more acidic. Warm waters held less oxygen. Whole ecosystems suffocated in the deep, leaving behind empty stretches of water where once life had thrived. Some scientists believe hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas, may have seeped from the oceans into the atmosphere, poisoning the skies and further king survivors. On land, forests withered and burned. Insects, once dominant in the Permian, collapsed in diversity. Synapsids, the ancestors of mammals, struggled to endure. Across Pangea's vast deserts and coasts, silence replaced the chorus of life. Picture this world. Great river valleys, reduced to scorched wastelands. Hills stripped bare of vegetation. Carcasses of reptiles lying in cracked soil. Even the air itself, thick, hot, and foul. A sky that no creature could trust to breathe. For the first time in Earth's history, extinction reached into nearly every corner of the biosphere. And yet, the story did not end there. The Great Dying was devastation, but it was also transformation. Out of this abyss, life clawed its way back. Small, resilient species survived. Plants that could endure heat and drought. Burrowing animals that found refuge underground. Marine creatures that adapted to toxic waters. They were few, but they were enough. Over millions of years, these survivors would seed the next great era of Earth, the Triassic period, a world where new forms of reptiles, the first true dinosaurs, and eventually mammals would emerge. It is a sobering thought. Without the Great Dying, there may never have been dinosaurs. And without dinosaurs, perhaps we would not be here to tell this story. But what makes this chapter so haunting is not just its scale, it is its mystery. We know volcanic activity played a role. We know the climate and atmosphere shifted violently. But was that the whole story? Some scientists point to methane release from ocean floors, others to asteroid impacts, or even the breakdown of Earth's ozone layer. Perhaps it was not one cause, but a deadly combination. Fire, poison, and suffocation working together in a perfect storm of extinction. The truth may never be fully uncovered, but the silence it left behind is carved deep in the rock record. Burn layers, fossil gaps, chemical signatures in ancient stone. They are the scars of a planet that nearly lost everything. The Great Dying forces us to confront a chilling question. How fragile is life on Earth? If one event, no matter how vast, could come so close to erasing the story of evolution, then survival itself is more precarious than we often imagine. But it also offers perspective. From the ashes of near-total annihilation, life always finds a way. Earth rebuilt itself, slowly, painfully, but with a persistence that defies despair. To walk the earth today is to tread on the bones of that forgotten world. Every fire or rest, every ocean, every creature carries echoes of the Great Dying. It is a reminder that life is both vulnerable and unstoppable, fragile enough to be undone, yet resilient enough to rise again. The darkest hour was not the end. It was a reset, a chance for new beginnings. And so, the Great Dying stands as both a warning and a testament. A warning of how quickly abundance can unravel, and a testament to the tenacity of life itself. For in the silence after the fire, in the stillness after the poisoned skies, life returned, changed, hardened, prepared to write the next chapter of Earth's story. The world had nearly ended, The Great Dying had silenced oceans, blackened skies, and left the land a graveyard of ash. Yet out of this stillness, life stirred again. Fragile, tentative, almost invisible at first. But these survivors, tiny creatures, stubborn plants, and resilient reptiles, were the sparks that would ignite the next age of Earth's story. Imagine walking across Pangea just after the cataclysm. The forests were gone. Vast deserts stretched where green once thrived. Rivers trickled weakly through barren valleys. And yet, here and there, small patches of green broke through the dust. Hardy ferns pushed up through cracked soil. Conifers spread their needle-like leaves, able to withstand extremes of heat and drought. These were not grand forests, but oases of survival, pockets of persistence against a hostile world. Among them crept the synapsids, the distant ancestors of mammals. Once diverse and dominant, they were now reduced to small, scrappy forms. Most were no larger than a rat. They scurried through undergrowth, dug into burrows, and scavenged whatever they could find. Their very smallness, once a weakness, became their strength. In a broken world with little food and many dangers, being small meant survival. Reptiles, too, seized their chance. Freed from many of their ancient competitors, they began to diversify in unexpected directions. Some evolved into swift predators, lean and agile hunters stalking riverbanks and desert plains. Others grew bulkier, testing the possibilities of size and strength. Among them were the earliest ancestors of dinosaurs, unremarkable at first glance, but holding within them the potential to one day dominate the planet. But Pangea was not just a scarred land. It was a stage like no other, a single continent, vast and unbroken, stretching from pole to pole. There were no oceans to divide creatures, no seas to isolate species. For the survivors, this meant freedom of movement. A reptile born in what is now South America could wander northward into regions that would become North America, or even eastward, toward the lands that would one day split into Africa, Europe, and Asia. Plants, too, spread their spores and seeds across unbroken distances, carried by winds, rivers, and migrating animals. This unity created something extraordinary, an evolutionary laboratory on a global scale. Every adaptation, every experiment in survival rippled outward across the entire supercontinent. Competition was fierce. When species met, they clashed. When they clashed, they changed. Evolution, driven by crisis and opportunity, accelerated. In this reborn world, ecosystems were fragile but dynamic. Along the coasts, where moisture from Panthalassa carried rains inland, forests of conifers and seed ferns returned. Insects buzzed again, though diminished from their earlier Permian giants. Amphibians lurked in rivers, and reptiles patrolled the forest edges. Farther inland, the picture was harsher. The deserts of Pangea's heart stretched endlessly, their red sands broken only by scattered patches of vegetation. Yet even here, life adapted. Plants evolved ways to conserve water. Animals learned to endure the long droughts. These desert survivors were hardy, specialized, and inventive, carving out niches in places where life should not have endured at all. And along the rivers that cut across the continent, green corridors formed. Wide floodplains supported rich vegetation, and in turn, these green belts became highways for life. Fossil evidence shows striking similarities in species, found thousands of kilometers apart. Proof that rivers carried creatures across Pangea like threads in a vast living web. This was the Triassic world, a time of rebuilding, of experimentation, of fragile beginnings. Small synapsids diversified, slowly edging closer to the blueprint of mammals. They were nocturnal, warm-blooded, sharp-toothed insect eaters, thriving in the margins where larger creatures did not bother to look. Reptiles, on the other hand, exploded into variety. Some took to the water, others dominated the plains. A few tested the skies, developing the first gliding and eventually flying forms. It was a time of possibilities, millions of evolutionary gambles, playing out on a world stage with few rules. Plants shaped this new earth as much as animals did. Conifers stabilized soils. Cycades spread across warmer regions. Ferns reclaimed land that had burned to ash. Even in the deserts, tough shrubs and drought-resistant vegetation created stepping stones for life to expand. Slowly, green returned to the planet. And yet, for all its vitality, this rebirth remained fragile. A single drought could collapse entire ecosystems. A volcanic eruption could choke out recovering forests. Climate swings across Pangea were extreme. Scorching summers, bitter winters, relentless monsoons along the coasts, and crushing dryness in the interior. The balance of life was always on a knife's edge. Still, life endured. And more than that, it flourished. Slowly, tentatively, but with an unstoppable persistence. Looking back, it is astonishing. Out of near total annihilation, the survivors did more than simply rebuild. They reinvented the world. From their small, desperate beginnings came the great lineages of the Mesozoic. The reptiles that experimented in form and function would give rise to dinosaurs. The synapsids that clung to survival in burrows and shadows would one day evolve into mammals. Even the plants of this era would lay the foundation for future forests. Pangea, unified and vast, had become a crucible. It tested life with extremes of climate, with deserts and storms, with vast unbroken distances. Those that survived emerged stronger, more adaptable, and ready to shape the future. The Great Dying had nearly silenced Earth. But Chapter 7 reminds us that life is never so easily erased. From tiny synapsids scurrying in the undergrowth, to reptiles prowling the riverbanks, to hardy plants greening the coasts, this fragile rebirth was the dawn of something new. The stage was set. Evolution was accelerating, and soon the experiments of this reborn world would give rise to the most iconic creatures the planet has ever seen. The Great Dying had reset the stage of life. The survivors were scattered, fragile, and few, but they carried within them the seeds of transformation. And now, on the vast expanse of Pangea, those seeds began to sprout. Slowly, quietly at first, new lineages took hold. Reptiles diversified, plants reclaimed the land, and the earliest dinosaurs stepped hesitantly into the light. This was not yet their age, but it was their beginning. Picture the Triassic landscape. Across the scarred land of Pangea, green was returning. Conifers rose like spires across coastal regions, their tough needles resistant to drought. Ferns spread wherever water pooled, painting floodplains in a wash of green. Cycades, with their thick palm-like leaves, stood like living relics of endurance, dotting the landscape with stubborn vitality. Together, these plants stitched life back onto the bones of Earth. They created shade, stabilized soils, and filled the air once again with oxygen. Their roots dug into the scars of volcanic plains. Their spores and seeds rode the winds across continents. With each passing generation, the land grew softer, more habitable. These forests were not just scenery. They were engines of recovery, laying the foundation for animals to thrive once again. And thrive they did. Among the first to seize this opportunity were the reptiles. Freed from many of their former rivals, they diversified with astonishing speed. Some remained small, scuttling hunters of insects and lizards. Others grew larger, adapting to the new abundance of plants and prey. Predators emerged, sleek, toothy creatures that patrolled riversides and stalked the edges of forests. Some were fast and agile, ambushing from cover. Others were armored, bristling with plates and spikes, testing strategies of defense as much as attack. Evolution was experimenting in every direction, as though life itself was searching for the perfect blueprint. Herbivores, too, began to rise. Stocky-bodied reptiles grazed on ferns and cycads. Long-necked forms stretched upward, reaching leaves out of their competitors' grasp. These plant-eaters reshaped the landscape as they spread, carrying seeds in their stomachs and leaving trails of fertilized ground in their wake. But hidden among these experiments was a new kind of creature. Small, unassuming, and easy to overlook. The earliest dinosaurs. They were not the towering giants we imagine today. No thunderous footsteps yet shook the ground. Instead, they were modest animals, some no larger than a dog, others scarcely taller than a human knee. They ran lightly on two legs, their slender frames built for speed and agility. Their teeth hinted at varied diets, some sharp for flesh, others suited for plants. In their time, they were minor players, overshadowed by larger, more dominant reptiles. Yet these humble beginnings carried a quiet promise. Their bones were light, their movements efficient, their adaptability unmatched. They were not rulers yet, but they were survivors in waiting. What gave dinosaurs their edge? Some scientists suggest it was their warm-blooded metabolism, allowing them to stay active when the climate swung between extremes. Others point to their posture, upright, efficient, built for speed and endurance. In a world of challenges, small advantages meant everything. And Pangea was the perfect testing ground. With its vast, unbroken landmass, species could spread freely, facing new climates and new competitors at every turn. From scorching deserts at the heart of the continent to lush floodplains along its rivers, dinosaurs and their reptilian kin were forced to adapt or vanish. Those that endured grew stronger. Those that faltered left space for others to rise. Meanwhile, the air buzzed with insects once again. Dragonflies skimmed the rivers. Beetles crawled through the undergrowth. Termites and other soil dwellers began breaking down plant matter, helping recycle nutrients and stabilize ecosystems. The web of life was knitting itself back together, each thread fragile but essential. It is humbling to realize how small these beginnings were. Today, we look back at the age of dinosaurs as an era of giants. But before the giants came, there was this, an age of subtle change, of small reptiles testing new forms, of plants reclaiming charred lands, of ecosystems quietly learning to breathe again. And yet, this was no peaceful Eden. The Triassic world was volatile. Earthquakes rattled the land as tectonic forces strained against the weight of Pangea. Volcanoes erupted, spreading ash across forests. Climate swung wildly. Monsoons drenched the coasts, while the interiors baked in unrelenting heat. Life had returned, but it lived always under the shadow of upheaval. Perhaps it was this instability that drove evolution forward. Every drought, every storm, every eruption became a filter. Only the adaptable survived, and survival bred innovation. The world was harsh, but it was also fertile ground for change. As plants rooted deeper and reptiles spread wider, the balance of power began to shift. From small beginnings, the dinosaurs were preparing for their rise. They were not yet kings, but their time was coming. In the background of this fragile rebirth, evolution was setting the stage for one of the greatest transformations in Earth's history. The age of dinosaurs had not yet arrived. But in the shadows of conifer forests, in the heat of desert plains, and along the winding rivers of Pangea, the first steps had been taken. The rise of new lineages had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. For millions of years, the supercontinent of Pangea stood as a unified world, a single landmass stretching from pole to pole, bound by the endless waters of Panthalassa. But deep within the earth, forces were stirring, forces that had once forged Pangea, and now were quietly beginning to tear it apart. This was not an abrupt destruction. It was a slow, almost reluctant farewell, a goodbye that unfolded over tens of millions of years. And as the land began to crack, the planet's climate, its creatures, and even the course of life itself were forever reshaped. It began with rifts, invisible at first, mere fractures in the crust. The weight of Pangea, spread so wide across the globe, created stresses that the Earth could not contain. Heat from the mantle built up beneath, pressuring the seams of the supercontinent. Imagine standing on that ancient land as the first signs appeared, deep fissures tearing across the ground, valleys sinking as the crust stretched and thinned. Magma surged upward through these wounds, painting the landscape with fire. The earth was opening its skin, preparing to divide what had once been whole. Over time, these cracks widened into rift valleys, and as they deepened, the sea began to intrude. Narrow waterways snaked into the fractures, filling them with salt water. What began as small inlets became widening seas. This was the start of the end, the slow flooding of Pangea. North America drifted away from Africa, tearing open the first expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. To the east, India began its long journey northward, breaking from the southern reaches of the continent and moving toward Asia, where one day it would collide and raise the mighty Himalayas. Elsewhere, fragments of the once united landmass shifted, rotated, and wandered into isolation. Pangea, once seamless, now became a puzzle, coming apart. But this was not merely a rearrangement. End of geography. The breakup unleashed fire. Vast volcanic eruptions poured from the rifts, releasing floods of lava that smothered landscapes and belched greenhouse gases into the skies. The Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history, erupted during this time, its impact so immense that it altered the climate and triggered yet another mass extinction. The Earth seemed restless, torn between creation and destruction, between stability and chaos. The climate swung wildly as the continents shifted. The opening seas changed wind patterns, redirecting monsoons and altering rainfall. Regions that had once been fertile grew dry. Deserts expanded and retreated with the shifting currents. The interiors of continents, once bound together in unity, now found themselves isolated, each developing its own unique climate. For life, this was both a challenge and an opportunity. Species that had once roamed freely across a connected world now found themselves cut off by oceans. Populations were divided, stranded on drifting fragments of land. Isolation drove evolution in new directions. Familiar creatures adapted into strange forms. The great archosaurs, ancestors of crocodiles and dinosaurs, followed separate destinies depending on where they were carried. Early mammals, once overshadowed, began their own slow path of diversification, aided by the barriers that kept predators at bay. The breaking of Pangea was not simply the death of a supercontinent. It was the birth of new worlds. But what must it have felt like to walk the land during this long goodbye? Along the coasts of newly forming oceans, you might have seen volcanic fire painting the horizon, rivers of molten rock pouring into the sea, hissing clouds rising into the sky. Inland, forests withered under changing climates, only to reappear in new regions as rainfall patterns shifted. Animals migrated along fault lines, following rivers that were being reshaped beneath their feet. It was a world in motion, continents adrift, climates unstable, and ecosystems forced to adapt or perish. The echoes of that ancient farewell are still with us today. The Atlantic Ocean, once a mere rift valley between Pangea's halves, now stretches wide enough to separate entire continents. India's relentless collision with Asia still raises the Himalayas higher each year. South America, Africa, Antarctica, and Australia all bear scars of the breakup, their coastlines still fitting together like pieces of a puzzle long pulled apart. And in the rocks, we find the record of fire, the basalt plains left behind by colossal eruptions, the ash layers that tell of sudden shifts in climate, the fossils of creatures caught in the upheaval of their changing world. Pangea's breakup was slow, but its consequences were permanent. The supercontinent was gone, and in its place, the map of our modern world began to take shape. The continents as we know them, their positions, their climates, their species, all trace their origins back to this long goodbye. But the story does not end there. The Earth has not finished its work. Even today, continents continue to drift. New rifts are forming in East Africa. The Atlantic still widens. Someday, the scattered pieces of today's world may once again come together in another supercontinent, just as Pangea itself was once born from earlier unions. The Earth remembers, and it repeats. Oh, the long goodbye of Pangea was not just an ending. It was a turning point. It gave us the world we know today, and it whispered a truth that still holds. Nothing on Earth is fixed. Not the land, not the oceans, not even the continents themselves. The ground beneath our feet is always moving, always changing, always writing the next chapter of Earth's mysterious history. Pangea may be gone. Its great deserts, its sprawling forests, its unbroken horizon, all vanished into the depths of time. Yet, if you look closely enough, its memory is still here. Etched into stone, carved into mountains, and even carried in the air we breathe. For though the supercontinent shattered nearly 200 million years ago, the Earth has never forgotten. Pangea's echo lingers all around us, shaping our world in ways most of us never realize. Consider the mountains. At first glance, the ranges that dot our continents today seem separate, isolated chains rising from scattered lands, but their roots tell another story. Take the Appalachian Mountains in North America. Their weathered ridges stretch like the spine of an ancient beast across the eastern United States. Now look across the Atlantic. In Scotland, in Greenland, in Morocco, you find rocks of the same age, carved from the same collisions. Once, these peaks stood shoulder to shoulder, fused together when Pangea was whole. Time and ocean have torn them apart, but their stone still whispers of a united Earth. The continents may have drifted, but the puzzle pieces remain. The fossils tell the same tale. Creatures that once roamed freely across Pangea left their bones scattered across lands now separated by vast oceans. The same species of early reptiles, the same plants, even the same insects appear in distant corners of the globe. How could identical forms of life exist in both South America and Africa, unless those continents were once joined? The rocks keep their secrets well, but the bones of the dead betray the truth. They are silent witnesses to a time when no seas stood between them. And then there are the oceans themselves. The great Atlantic, which today divides the old world from the new, was born from Pangea's wounds. When North America drifted from Africa, rift valleys opened and the sea spilled in. That crack became a trickle. The trickle widened into a strait, and today it has become one of the most powerful oceans on Earth, an ocean that still grows wider each year. The currents that churn within it, driving storms and shaping climates, are a direct legacy of that ancient fracture. Every hurricane, every shift in rainfall, every wind that sweeps across its waters carries with it the long shadow of Pangea's breakup. Even the air we breathe has been shaped by that lost supercontinent. When Pangea split apart, new coastlines formed. Oceans began to lap against fresh shores, releasing moisture into the atmosphere. Rain fell where deserts once sprawled. Winds shifted as mountains rose in new places. The monsoons that drench India, the trade winds that cross the Atlantic, the jet streams that ripple around the globe, all trace their origins to the reshaping of Earth that followed Pangea's fall. In this way, every storm we endure, every season we witness, carries within it a faint echo of that ancient world. But perhaps the most profound legacy lies in life itself. The creatures that spread across Pangea carried their lineages into the divided continents. Dinosaurs, mammals, and countless plants all took different evolutionary paths, depending on which drifting landmass they called home. Isolation became a crucible for diversity. What began as one interconnected ecosystem fractured into many, giving rise to the spectacular variety of life we see today. Without the breakup of Pangea, would mammals ever have risen to dominate after the age of dinosaurs? Would humans ever have appeared? The question lingers like a ghost, unanswerable, yet tantalizing. Even today, the Earth continues to move, as if Pangea's memory is still alive within its restless plates. The continents creep across the globe at the pace of fingernails growing, silent, relentless, unstoppable. New rifts tear at the land, like in East Africa, where someday an ocean may split the continent in two. In 100 million years, the map of the world will look nothing like it does now. Perhaps another supercontinent will rise, a new Pangea reborn under different skies. If that happens, we will simply be another echo in a cycle far older and far greater than ourselves. And so, the story of Pangea is not just history. It is ascent. It is future. It is written into the mountains beneath our feet, the winds above our heads, and the very fabric of life that surrounds us. It reminds us of something humbling. The Earth is never still. Continents drift, oceans widen, mountains rise, and climates shift. Nothing is fixed. Not the land, not the seas, not even the world we think we know. Pangea may have vanished into the past, but its echo is eternal, resonating in stone, in sea, in sky, and in us. The question, then, is not whether Pangea is gone. It is how long until its story begins again.